Good morning passengers, welcome to Martel Air. My name's Amanda and I'll be your pilot for today. We're just beginning boarding for flight number 22 from Hamilton Island to Townsville. So grab your seats while I finish up the last steps of the pre-flight inspections of this Cessna Grand Caravan, the pride of the Martel Air fleet. Before engine start checklist. Pre-flight inspection complete. Parking brake handle set. Electrical system switches off. Ignition switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Bleed air heat switch off. Power lever idle. Prop RPM max. Fuel condition lever cut off. Fuel shut off knob verify in check. Battery switch on. Cabin lights on. Cockpit lighting set. Wing flaps position up. No smoking lights on. Before engine start checklist complete. Good morning passengers, the weather today on Hamilton Island is bright and sunny as you'd expect for a tropical paradise. And we'll be cruising at an altitude of 8,000 feet, flying over Cape Upstart and Cape Bowling Green on our way to Townsville. Your cabin crew today is me, assisted as always by my co-pilot, Wing Commander Lamington. And your emergency exits are located to the back of the cabin where you entered the plane. I also have a door up here by me, and if you see me leave, please follow me quickly. Our in-flight catering services are provided by our wonderful passengers, so I hope you pack something interesting. We also have a Ko-fi machine in the back for those who'd like to support the channel and buy snacks for Wing Commander Lamington. Engine start checklist. Battery switch on. Beacon lights on. Avionics 1 on. Bus volts check. Emergency power lever normal. Inertial separator handle bypass. EIS readings check. Propeller area clear. Fuel boost switch on. Starter switch. Oop, no, not starter switch. So fuel pressure boost on shown, check. Fuel pressure low not shown, check. Fuel flow 0, check. Starter switch start. Ignition on shown, check. Oil PSI check. NG stable. Fuel condition low idle. Fuel flow in expected range check. NG climbing. And NG stable. Starter switch off. EIS readings check. Generator load check. Battery apps positive check. Fuel boost switch normal. Avionics 2 on. nav lights on. We're now ready for departure, so please fasten your seatbelts and turn off your devices apart from those used to watch this stream. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. And just double checking on some stream health things. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a bug starting up the stream today because new version of OBS was slightly different and it turned clicking on the go live button into a double click, and the go live button turns into the end broadcast button. So I had to redo the link that I had distributed for today's stream because it turned out to be not the right stream, because you can't restart an ended stream. Okay, before departure taxi checklist. Taxi lights on, seatbelt lights on, taxi clearance. Hamilton Ground, Martel 22 with information Alpha, request taxi for takeoff, north departure. Taxi 2 and hold short runway 32 via taxiway Bravo, cross runway 32, Martel 22. Taxi clearance check. Nav source set. Prop RPM to minimum. Fuel condition low idle. Inertial separator to bypass. And parking brake released. Before departure taxi checklist complete. Okay, so we are in fact taxiing to that end of the runway. Prop RPM up to get us some reverse thrust. There we go. Oh dear. So that's what we call a graphical glitch. Let's not look at that plane too much. And gentle braking. And you have to make sure not to brake too hard when reversing. Otherwise, the plane ends up tipping onto its back, which is very embarrassing. And we will just put the brakes on while this guy decides what he's doing. I don't think he would be very good for our propeller by walking into it. So it looks like to take off from runway 32, we in fact have to back taxi, which means we will be doing our before takeoff checklist here before entering the runway, because you do not enter the active runway unless you've got permission, and this place has one active runway. Okay, so nice and short taxi out to where we're starting from. Before takeoff checklist, parking brake set, altimeter QNH set, and it is of course showing us at about 20 feet from sea level, as we are on a very flat island here. Just double checking that, and yes, I am streaming. This is still working, even if the passenger cabin's a little bit quiet in the chat there. Standby flight instruments check. Fuel boost switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Fuel quantity check. Fuel shut-off knob fully in check. Standby alt power on. Anti-ice system. It is 23 degrees outside, so the anti-ice system is not required today. Inertial separator handle, I think we can go to normal. Autopilot setup. So, altitude set for initial cruise. 8,000 feet set. Flight level change mode engaged. Flight level change speed set to VY. 110 knots. Heading mode set. And aligned to a runway heading. No, come on, behave. Oh, it's doing that. Of course it is. Okay, so set for runway heading. And bank mode engaged. Autopilot preparation set. Nav source correctly set. Check. Transponder on alt. Flaps to takeoff position. Takeoff clearance. Hamilton Tower, Martel 22, ready at runway 32 for departure to the north. Cleared for takeoff, runway 32, Martel 22. Takeoff clearance check. Strobe lights on. Landing lights on. Taxi lights off. Seatbelt light is on. Parking brake release. Fuel condition high idle. Prop RPM to max. Before takeoff checklist complete. Entering runway. Now we will be using the full length of the runway today because we are set for a maximum takeoff weight takeoff. I've included contents in the cargo pod underneath because I figure after a couple of weeks on Hamilton Island people will have picked up souvenirs and seashells and who knows what else, so having that set up for playing around with maximum weight takeoff seems like a good excuse. And as we make our way up the runway in a back taxi, we're keeping an eye on the sky in front of us, just double checking that it's not going to suddenly be full of plane coming in to try and land on top of us. And since we're back taxiing and the active runway is in fact the direction behind us, we can assume that anybody coming in for a landing will be coming in from in front of us. And if they're not, then we've got bigger problems. But also, we're down this end now, so they should be landing and making decisions before they get to us. And a quick glance at the windsock behind us tells us that it's fairly light wind conditions. We were given winds at 3025 knots, which that looks about right for. And we slow down. Here's the runway threshold. And a lovely little turning bay. How useful. Means that we don't have to stress the directional braking, and we can just have a nice scenic view out over the water and the other Hamilton Islands as we turn around and line up on the runway. Okay. Takeoff checklist. Flaps are in takeoff position. And we advance the power. Wing Commander Lamington, confirmed ready for takeoff. Thank you. And smoothly advancing the power into our takeoff range. And we've got plenty of runway. our maximum climb rate speed until we get clear of these obstacles such as the other islands around here. And it is a little bit sluggish getting into the air. Hamilton Tower, Martel 2-2, will continue for north departure confirmed. Would be a fascinating sort of place to live. Ooh, engine temperature's getting a little high. We can deal with that. Up. Watching the altitude. And now that we are nicely in the air, let's engage the autopilot. Okay, cruise climb checklist. Anti-ice not required. Inertial separator normal. Airspeed, autopilot holding at VY. Prop RPM should be set for 1900. Hamilton Tower, Martel 2-2 going to 135.5. Brisbane Centre, Martel 2-2 is type Cessna Caravan, 5 miles northwest of Hamilton Island, 2,400 feet, climbing to 8,000, request flight following. Squawk 1022, Martel 2-2. Okay. Engine temperature is top of the acceptable range. Okay, 2,000 feet above the airfield. Landing lights off. Lovely. And we've got our usual lovely views out of the Hamilton Islands and the various bits of lovely tropical blue water and sandy beaches. And now that we are nicely into the air, let's turn towards our cruising path. Just double checking all of the interesting little instrument things. Prop RPM's good. Is acceptable. Climb speed is a little sluggish, but that's to be expected, really. And we'll get that back to topographical maps. And we're climbing into Charlie airspace. Brisbane Centre, Martel 2-2, request clearance to transition Charlie airspace. Cleared through Charlie airspace, Martel 2-2. Lovely. And we are definitely in the sort of parts of Australia that I have almost no idea about from having actually been there, which is going to be the running theme for most of our trip around the coastline, because I've never actually been further north than Brisbane. So, given that essentially until we get all the way around to Perth, I'll be in unknown to me sort of territory, should be an interesting one. But we have our lovely little beachside towns facing out into the beautiful blue waters where it's shallow and sandy. I'm just looking up on a map which little town that is. Chute Harbour. So I'm going to guess that that harbour there is also a Chute Harbour. Well, apparently, so the bay there is Chute Bay, and we've got Repair Reef and Tancred Reef, and what's the third one? Chute Reef. Makes sense, I guess. It seems like every other town along here is something beach, which I suppose makes sense when everything here is beach. It's not quite as beach as 90 Mile Beach, the capital of and corporate headquarters of beach that we've previously visited, but that's okay. And here we've got Airlie Beach and Cannon Vale, which are, you know, everything around here is just kind of called Whitsunday something, because these are essentially the mainland towns directly nearest the Whitsunday Islands that we just took off from, so you know, it makes sense that those are the ones that, you know, if you want the resorts that you don't have to go across a little stretch of water to get to, that will make sense to me. And there's the noise that says we're within 1,000 feet of cruise. But the engine is working nicely for our fully weighted climb, even if it's a little heavier than it's perhaps wanting it to be normally. It's always interesting when you can fully load the plane and see how it goes. Okay, cruise checklist. Seatbelt light off. Anti-ice system not quite required. Inertial separator to normal. Power lever as we reach our cruising altitude. There we go. Leveling off, picking up a little speed. Back to 87%. Prop RPM to 1750. Which I expect those are probably not readable on a stream, as they are, you know, approximately readable on my 27-inch screens, although, you know, that's with standard full HD rather than any of the 2K, 4K stuff going on. But we've got 1750 and 87%. Engine temperature in much nicer range, and fuel balance is balanced. cruise checklist complete. Lovely. So yes, hello to the silent people in the passenger cabin at the moment. If you feel like saying anything in the chat, that would be lovely, but your company is appreciated either way. So last week we didn't have the usual stream because my monthly second Saturday plans were turned into first Saturday and also the Sunday full day plans, which meant that things got moved around a little bit. So I had the pre-recorded stream of doing the pre-flight checks. So, knowing that checklist content is part of what you are really here for, that was a nice thing to get to play with. It's the first time I've done a pre-recorded stream rather than streaming it live and then just saving the recording. But, I mean, you might notice that it has approximately the same editing quality as one of the streams because I did record it as though a stream. Just, without uploading it live. So those of you hoping that the pre-recorded content would have somehow higher production values, I'm sorry and deeply amused to disappoint. But, this is how it goes. So, as we get along the coast here, we've got Cape Gloucester and Gloucester Island. And, one of the main beaches down here is apparently called Dingo Beach. It's quite possibly the sort of beach that has dingoes on it. You get a lot of places, especially islands and beaches, that are named for particular local wildlife. Sometimes plants as well. But just when the white explorers showed up, what was it full of? So you get Dingo Beach, Kangaroo Island, and for those of you who know your sea shanties or just Sydney geography, Botany Bay was named because it had lots of interesting plants in it, so the botanists could go wild. It was also far too many plants for it to be any good for actually setting up the settlement, so they went to the next harbour along, which is now Sydney Harbour. But Botany Bay is just within Sydney now because that's how large cities are. And one of the things that you get with a lot of the points along this coast is that Australia's flat with flat bits are coming along again, so you get the flat with flat bit and mountain, flat with flat bit and crinkly bit, which, when sea levels go up again, will quite probably just become Australia's flat coast with islands. And quite possibly were islands originally. You can see that there's quite a low sandy area as most of the entrance to the end of this cape, which is a bit of a running theme along here. And yeah, you can see flat with flat bits and occasional up. And Cape Upstart, that is our first waypoint, is a particularly strong example of that actually. It's flat, 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 and then up. So I kind of have to assume that Cape Upstart was originally an island and just kind of got a sandbank connecting it a little strongly. At some point I'll have to just get one of those sea level rise maps and see what happens to the Queensland coast if you give it even a metre or two. think one of the topics last stream was the Australian Aboriginal place names that we get that keep coming up. It's one of the things that, there's all sorts of lists of, but much like in North America where you get the particular flavour of how some local place names sound, and it turns out to just be the way that the local indigenous languages sound. Australia gets there's a couple of different types of Aboriginal place names. There's the white people showed up and asked what the name is for particular places. So, you get things like Wollongong and Woolloomooloo and all these sorts of things. Those are both in or near Sydney. Other places that we've been over include Gundagai and Maruya. And some of them have been almost lost to linguistic drift, bad transcriptions and time. So Canberra is probably from a local indigenous name for meeting place. Some of the regions of Canberra include Tuggeranong, meaning cold place, and Gungahlin, which is possibly Little Rocky Hill, possibly White Man's House. But then again, you get one of the other regions of Canberra, Woden, named for Wotan / Odin / any other number of ways to transcribe the Germanic / Norse god. There's many lists, often in no particular order, which gets a little bit weird. So, finding an interesting list of Australian Aboriginal names that are in modern current use has been a little bit interesting, just because they're never sorted by how prominent the places are, or you'd think that they'd be trying to celebrate it a little bit more than just listing them en masse, but it is what it is. So the second type of Australian Aboriginal place names that you get are much like we saw with Kagari, Fraser Island. You get the dual naming. So one of the two will be considered the primary name, and it's often actually the indigenous name, and then / the other name. So in a lot of things it is Kagari / Fraser Island, which, when you get places where the name wasn't awful, but we wanted to get the proper original name for it in there, then having the dual name means that people who only know Fraser Island still learn to identify Kagari with Fraser Island, which there are, I'm sure, a number of fascinating arguments that can be made in either direction about that particular approach to things. And there are some where the dual naming has faded. So one of the more notable ones, so you get the officially listed as a dual name, but we don't use the European name anymore. So Uluru, the big lump of sandstone in the middle of flat, in the middle of nowhere, large sandstone monolith that is sacred to the Pintarjara people of the area, used to be known as Ayers Rock after some random... so the Chief Secretary of South Australia at the time it was surveyed was Sir Henry Ayres. We don't care about Henry Ayres. It's Uluru. If you want to call it Ayers Rock, you're just going to sound weird. There's another rock formation nearby called Katajuta, also known as the Olgas or Mount Olga, and it is officially Katajuta/Mount Olga. That one, you sound less weird if you use the European one, but let's face it, Katajuta just sounds cooler. And so, there is the Uluru Katajuta National Park that is just all combined in together as one national park, because they're fairly close together. And one thing I will note is that both of these rock formations are in fact considered sacred to the local Aboriginal community. There was a bit of a whiny outcry over the ban on climbing Uluru, because it's a big lump of stone, surely I should be allowed to climb it. So yeah, it's sacred to the local people, and tourists were not climbing it respectfully. One of the common, let's call it, employments for the local population was in fact clearing the climbing trails all over their sacred mountain and washing off the rubbish, picking up the rubbish, washing off the human excrement from people who couldn't hold it till they got down again. So, if you still object to the ban on climbing Uluru, I'd like you to think of a local culturally significant site for you. It could be a cathedral, could be a war memorial, anything like this. Big, impressive building that is culturally important and kind of inviolable to you. And now imagine a couple of thousand people climbing it and crapping on the top. Yeah, if you still want to climb Uluru, I don't like you. So we are making our way up the coast. Nice, relaxing flight. Engine is still looking lovely. Engine temperature's good, fuel levels are good. No traffic to speak of. A little bit of traffic on the ATC channels, but nothing we really need to worry about. So the flat bit sticking out into the water with a crinkly bit at the end of it ahead of us is Cape Upstart. And you can see what I mean by this really looks like an island that got connected by a sandbar. I have no real evidence or geological surveys to that fact. It's one of the sort of things where you just get endless geographical formations that how much any of them gets easily accessible documentation as to what's going on, that's a little variable. I'm just looking up and seeing what we've got. So this is another one of those spots covered in a few different sacred spaces for the local Juru people. And, you know, of course, occupied for the past several thousand years. Which means that, you know, this is actually one of the places that the native title cases have actually been successful. So there's, you know, a number of different spaces along the various parts of Cape Upstart. It's a protected Category 2 National Park and under native title, so that's rather nice to see, of just places getting protected and used by the people who've been there for thousands of years. Oh, we've got another that looks like it's going to be mining related, possibly just port related. Always fascinating to see the infrastructure that you can see from the air. What area is that actually? Probably Abbott Point, I think. Let's see what it says about that. Oh yeah, Abbott Point. That's a little bit more obvious as one of the named by white people. So that is the Abbott Point Port, the most northerly deepwater coal port, which would explain the coal loading yards there, and exceptionally long pier for large container ships or not container ships, bulk cargo, to not have to get into too close to the shoreline where rocks are. In fact, let's just do a little circle so we can have a look at that actually, because that looks like some interesting infrastructure. So yeah, extra long coal loading pier. And yes, the Australian industrial output that is fairly heavily focused on raw material extraction for reasons of we've got a bunch. So, you know, where most of Europe went through a lot of its coal supplies in 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, Australia started a bit slower on that, but we've now got huge coal industries with modern equipment and that sort of size of port for taking the coal off and putting it on ships. And yes, the ships that would dock here are utterly massive and terrifying. The joys of it's much more efficient to have giant ships that can carry everything in one go. Oh, and some moon over there. So yeah, we've got lovely tropical tropical islands and resorts over there, and coal port, because, you know, that's what Australia's like. And yes, this will be positioned to take advantage of a gap through the Great Barrier Reef. Because, so yeah, this is the northernmost coal port, just because as the Great Barrier Reef gets closer and tighter, it just gets harder to get harder to get cargo ships through for, you know, fairly obvious reasons. They don't call it a barrier reef for nothing. Yeah, so that's just a little break of me getting distracted by infrastructure. And a fun little side point about coal. People like to think that coal and oil are made from dinosaurs, but in fact the vast majority of coal deposits, and well, oil deposits which are coal deposits where something complicated happened that made it turn liquid, were actually from a time called the Carboniferous period rather than the Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. And yes, the Carboniferous period is called that because it's when the carbon was put down. So that is 358.9 to 298.9 million years ago, which is quite some time ago. So this is, during Pangea and a little... so coming into Pangea. And the formation of Pangea caused a massive environmental upset that destroyed the... So, essentially, there was a global rainforest because high oxygen levels, no ice on the poles, and also basically no animal life on land because that was only just starting to evolve. That's how long ago this is. And the things that, the microbial communities that break down the lignin in trees had also not really evolved yet. So when the trees fell, they just kind of got built on top of. So either when they die or burn down and just leave a lump of charcoal, all this sort of stuff, you just get the next generation of trees on top, which is how you get these massive deposits of carbon that didn't get cycled back into the environment. And the reason that they are so far underground is that it was that many million years ago. So yes, if you're curious about the various stages of life on Earth, there are a great many YouTube channels that will go through it. My favourite at the moment is a channel called Paleoanalysis, who are going through the entire history of the Earth one step at a time. It's fascinating, and re-listening to the compilation is actually one of my favourite ways to get to sleep, just because it's familiar, it's soothing, and interesting enough to stop my brain from wandering. That was a tangent from something. Oh yes, the third kind of Australian Aboriginal place names that we get are we renamed this because it was utterly dreadful. Which I'm just trying to think. I mean, one, can I find a good list of them? So, the places that get renamed, there's been a few like those named after King Leopold of Belgium, who was genocidal to the same extent as Hitler but did it against Africans, so people just kind of overlook it. Not to say that it's any better or worse, but King Leopold does not get the same attention. There's a few places where it's various ethnic slurs. You know, some of them not too bad, but we really need to move away from them. Some of them where it's utterly dreadful. Okay, here we go. 10 races names Queensland wiped off the maps. Oh wow, yeah, this news article is heavily censored. N-words bounce, Mount N-word, N-word head, N-word creek. Yeah, let's... I'm good with those being renamed. So those are, I think, mostly being moved across to Aboriginal place names, which is good. Bare minimum, I'd have thought, but you know. It gets interesting when you get these lists of, wow, the white people exploring Australia were sometimes really racist. So yes, the King Leopold Rangers, named after King Leopold II, whose regime killed and maimed millions of Congolese in the late 1800s, is now Munamin Milawundi, which is much nicer. And yeah, the entire list of things gets fascinating. But here we are at Cape Upstart, the first one of our little destinations on the path, and you can really see how it's flat and sandy and then mountain. So I really think this started off as an island that got attached by a sandbank, which those can happen in the most fascinating ways because, you know, you get the water slowing down a little bit as it flows through the gap between the island and the mainland, which means that the water can carry a little bit less of the sand that's built up in it, so that little bit of sand gets dropped, which slows the water down a little bit more as it's flowing through, so a little bit more sand gets dropped. There is, of course... Oh, hello, piney tree. We are just flying over Cape Upstart, which I'm pretty sure was an island originally. Look at it. And I've been rambling about place names. So I don't know how much of what I've been rambling about you've been here for, but going to 120.55, Martel 22. Goodbye. Brisbane Centre, Martel 22, entering your airspace 8,000 feet. Yeah, so essentially what I've been rambling about is the three categories of Australian Aboriginal place names that we've got going on. There's the white explorers showed up and asked what the name for this place is. There's the ones where we've renamed them to be dual named Aboriginal and Western names, such as Uluru/Ayers Rock, although that one in particular nobody calls it Ayers Rock anymore. And there's a whole rant about not climbing Ayers Rock. And the one I was just getting through was the, oh my god, we really needed to not use these place names anymore, let's replace them with indigenous names. A lot of the articles on that were heavily censored because, wow. So, continuing the ramble on place names, we also get place names that get renamed for similar reasons, but not quite so horrible. There was a petition by Peter, the animal rights, let's be polite and call them activists, who wanted to rename Eggs and Bacon Bay in Tasmania just because it was, not vegan enough. That one I just find hilarious. Much different to the King Leopold Ranges. And one of the other ones is World War One. A lot of places got moved away from their German names. One that we've been over is Holbrook, which was Germantown until 1915. But Bismarck Street, Kaiser Street, Hamburger Street, all these sorts of things. Queensland apparently had a decent amount of German place names that are now just German Gardens got renamed Belgian Gardens. That amuses me. But South Australia had the most German place names just because of settlement patterns. But yeah, wow, that's quite a list. But at least those aren't like dreadful. Like, we're not renaming 7 different N-word creeks for the German sentiments. Yes, it was quite a ramble as I went through some articles. There are no good, just like, single sets of... Here's some interesting, notable indigenous place names that you should know about. There are lists of 100, which is a bit more than makes for snappy stream content. Not that my stream content is snappy at the best of times, but and I'm just going to mute the mic to cough. Please yell at me if I forget to unmute again. There we go. That's better. And yeah, the list of places where it's like, oh, I don't want to say that place name. It's yeah, there's been a decent movement in Australia lately to rename those places. Usually with, particularly the racist against indigenous people place names, those are specifically getting indigenous place names now, which is lovely. The places where it's getting the dual naming, that's just, we think it would be better to be using the indigenous place name, but the place name that everybody already knows, like Fraser Island, Ayers Rock, Mount Olga, those ones aren't bad, they're just not right. So those can go second in the dual place name. So it's officially gazetted as Kagari/Fraser Island, Uluru/Ayers Rock, Karajuta/Mount Olga. And because that means that people who know Fraser Island can work out what Kagari is. Uluru has been done long enough that it's just it's just settled. We don't need Rock as a name anymore. And of course, one of the things is, can we find a single indigenous place name for particular place? Emphasis on Uluru on the last U. Basically, yeah, it's one of those ones that has a, so it's weak emphasis, no emphasis, strong emphasis. So the middle U is, usually written up with the pronunciation guide of a schwa, so it's just a sound. So Uluru, and yes, most of the emphasis on the third syllable, which is the exact opposite stress pattern as in the lovely lady from Star Trek, Uhura, which, I have occasionally seen typos swapping the two, which gives mental images of a giant sandstone monolith in a red dress. Weird mental image. Yeah, so one of the things that we get is places that are shared between different indigenous communities, especially ones from different linguistic groups. Well, what name do we go with if they don't all have the same name? So one of the things that gets interesting is that it's smaller, very specific places that are getting the Aboriginal names for the most part. Sometimes you get, towns and cities that take the name for something specific in them, but applying it more broadly to the whole city. So, as mentioned before you connected, Canberra is, I don't know the Aboriginal pronunciation for it, but Canberra is an Aboriginal word for meeting place, probably. And a lot of these, there is a strong probably over the top because, look, when you're dealing with oral cultures and you're also dealing with the entire concept of colonialism, stuff can actually get lost. That's one of the other big problems. And one of the fun things you get is, so the local Aboriginal group for Canberra are the Ngunnawal people, and yes, that starts NG, which does not show up in standard English. One thing that I rather enjoy is that one of the suburbs in northern Canberra is actually called Ngunnawal. When I'm really trying to pronounce it correctly, that's the time that I screw it up. Ngunnawal. Or Ngunnawal, possibly. I do not speak their language much as I would like to, and I know some people who know some parts of it for usually the acknowledgement of country. It's really cool whole thing. Usually just pronounced Ngunnawal. But yeah, where you get this sound cluster does not occur in English, or often quite specifically does not occur at the start of words. Like, there are things that cannot be initial, like word initial clusters. So NG, you can have it anywhere else in a word. English has words that are mostly that consonant that we write as two letters, but is actually just a single sound. Like, you look at the word singing, that is just that N cluster twice with an S at the start, and optional vowels. Linguistics rant. But so one of the popular things at the moment is when writing your postal address, as the second line of it, you put which Aboriginal group's territory is a bad word for it, country. Whose country you're in. The entire concept of fixed territories and borders and all this is a white addition to a complicated tradition set. But so there are maps of whose country you can be acknowledging yourself as being in. But yeah, one of the things at the moment is putting that as part of your postal address. And Australia Post is just, they're fine with that. They're actually encouraging it, but publishing guidance on how to do it such that it still gets where it needs to go. Side distraction as we fly over this interesting cape. So this is the second one of our waypoints on the way to Townsville, which is Cape Bowling Green, which is a fascinating and ridiculous name for it, I think. But it is one of those lovely hook-shaped sandbars that just keeps going. Has been responsible for quite a number of shipwrecks, which is why there is a lighthouse on it. But Cape Bowling Green is just such a ridiculous name. I love it so much. And it's such shape. Yeah, so acknowledgement of country is a thing in Australian culture that has been growing in prominence. Look, I assume it's named for lawn bowling. I can't think of any other thing it could be named for, really. But yeah, so in Australian culture, it's been gaining a lot of prominence to start things with an acknowledgement of country. So there are two related but very different things involved in this. There's the acknowledgement of country, and there's the welcome to country. Most meetings, so this is used in business meetings, public gatherings, anything where you're giving speeches especially. But all of my work meetings, if it's above a certain size, there is just, we're starting with the acknowledgement of country. A welcome to country is a lot less common because most people can't do it. I, for example, can give an acknowledgement of country. So I cannot give a welcome to country. So just pulling up the standard guidance for how to phrase it. There's all sorts of, what's the correct phrasing at the moment? But so for me, it would be, I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the land that I am on today, and wish to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And this one has got different wording than I'm used to. Pulled up the local government one, and it's that's not how we do it mostly, but that's the general phrasing of acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which you are meeting, naming them, and paying your respects to their elders, past and present, possibly also emerging as just we acknowledge that this is a living culture with young people who will become elders. And then you'll essentially do a shout out to any members of the indigenous community who are present in the whatever it is that you're doing the acknowledgement for. Now, the reason that I can do an acknowledgement of country but not a welcome to country is it's not my country to welcome you to. I am white as heck, mayonnaise, a mutt of the British Isles. My mother is quite good at the genealogy documentation stuff, as has been rambled about previously. So I know for a fact that I have no blood ties to the land that I am on. 100% colonial. It's not my country to welcome you to. If you were doing a welcome to country in my area, you would get a member of the Ngunnawal community to come and do it for you. And if they said no, then they don't do it. Because if they don't want to do a welcome, they don't have to welcome you. It's their country. Which, you know, always kind of fun. And one of the things that I find really cool about them recently is that there are people who have been trained by, in this specific case, trained by the Ngunnawal community and authorised by their elders to deliver an acknowledgement of country in the Ngunnawal language, which sounds amazing. And the fact that this is done in communication, in communication and consultation with the relevant local community, I find that really cool. Yeah, there's been a big push in Australia over the last 10-20 years to get them to be much more of a thing. A couple of years ago, when I was chairing an international symposium hosted by the Australian branch of the group, I started it off with an acknowledgement of country and invited everybody else to reflect on whose land they were on. And so a bunch of the other attendees went through and named whose land they were on. The English people... oh hey, you actually spelled Ngunnawal correctly. The English people in England couldn't do quite so much because the conquest stuff there is long enough ago that it gets weird. Yeah, when somebody does acknowledgement of country in Ngunnawal and fairly fluidly because they spent so much time working on memorizing it, it's amazing. And is a really good reminder that, this is an entire other culture that still exists. Brisbane Centre, Martel 22 inbound to Townsville, requests transition of Charlie airspace. Cleared through the Charlie airspace, Martel 22. But yes, it's I don't know that I would have the memorization and pronunciation skills to be able to do it, and especially to do it justice. But that would be an interesting thing to look at someday. But yeah, so I have a few friends who have been trained and authorized to do it, and it's such a treat to get to see it done and done well. Looking at how far we're making it up the coast along this map. The point across the north is just an endless stretch of straight lines. So, you know, next week we'll probably be making it up to Cairns. See how long a stream that ends up being. I feel like I've got at least one tangent that I didn't finish, and I can't remember what it was. Yes, we are getting in towards Townsville, which is, yeah, the next one of the major... I found the name Townsville really amusing, just linguistically. The fact that Townsville is a city, and a city of like 180,000 as well, so it's not tiny. But if you look at the name, okay, so technically, apparently it was named after a guy called Robert Towns, but going to 126 Decimal 8, Martel 22, goodbye. Townsville approach, Martel 22, entering your airspace 8,000 feet. Look, Townsville just works as the most generic name of a town possibly. Like, it's like that thing where you get how many times can we use the word river in the name of this river? You know, the classic River Avon, which is river. Sahara Desert. And yeah, the city of Townsville. Settlement. Just, we need to go deeper. And the fact that it is the city of Townsville, just delightfully ridiculous. Townsville and its surrounds were actually part of one of the first native title cases, which is an interesting one because of the whole history of that. You know, as we were going through the various places before, just the whole concept of native title claims and what legal claims that does and doesn't give gets complicated, but Eddie Mabo's case that made it to the High Court was one of the first, was the first major one, and especially the first major one that actually worked. So, you know, legal cases acknowledging that terra nullius was not actually valid. Okay, getting in towards Townsville now. About 15 miles out, so let's take that altitude down a bit, because we don't want to be trying a dive to get to our landing point. So, Piney Tree, did you manage to catch last week's recording of the checklist special? I'm rather curious how that went. because it was just me and a checklist. Ah, Canada's been having some as well. That's nice. But yeah, so Australian native title claims, there's been a whole series of them. So since the Mabo decision, so legal cases are always just the thing where they get named after the person filing the case, etc., etc. So the Mabo decision, named for Eddie Mabo, who filed the case, pulling up some stuff. But yeah, so that was essentially the legal overturning of terra nullius, which is the legal doctrine that when white people settled in 1788, the land belonged to nobody until they arrived. Never mind the 60,000 years of inhabitation. So yes, 1992 Mabo case, and then 12 months later the Native Title Act was passed. So the case had some stuff centered in Townsville, but was actually over some islands in the Torres Strait, which is the bit between the point at the top of Australia and Papua New Guinea. But yeah, so the past 30 years have been actually getting native title recognition becoming a thing, and it was because one guy really pushed the legal system and got it happening. Like, there's a lot of other stuff related, but you've got to respect the guy who sued the government and won in the High Court. Related little weirdness, I'm always fascinated by what places name their highest court. Because, High Court, Supreme Court, all these sorts of things, they all just kind of mean the same thing. But which one you use, and sometimes if you use use them in different orders in different countries. So yes, Tasmania is the island with a slightly amusing shape off the south of Australia's east coast, and the Torres Strait is the water separating the northern tip of Queensland from Papua New Guinea. And in fact, when being formal, a lot of the time, instead of saying Indigenous or Australian Aboriginal, it is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, because they are a separate enough group that they are listed separately. So there's a lot of agencies with ATSI as part of their acronym. So that is just... one of the things I have at the moment is the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. Because that's the thing I've got open about the Mabo case to make sure I'm not getting too wrong. But yes, those are listed separately for uses where it's relevant. Stuff about things happening in Canberra, for example, being a very long way from the Torres Strait, usually don't involve Torres Strait Islanders because their lands are so far away. But given that Canberra is also the national capital, you do get and there's the airport, you do get just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stuff listed because it's the national organisations. Townsville Tower, Martel 22, is 3 miles east, 4,000 feet, with information Quebec to land. make right downwind, runway 19, Martel 22. Okay, so what are we setting? We are turning that way. So we're setting up for runway 19, so we need to be going along 01. One of my recent additions is a directional rose off to the side that has all of the back courses. Because there are so many things where you need to subtract 18 or add 18 from a number. And it's like, I could really use a cheat sheet for this. So I drew one up. Let's just load up the visual runway 19 straight. Lovely, and we are lining up on oh yeah, calculator app gets used so much. But my little cheat sheet that's hanging up off to one side. Look, my enjoyment of calculator apps is so heavily centered in every one of my maths teachers who said you won't be carrying a calculator. Won't be carrying a calculator, eh? In fact, I actually started carrying a calculator in my pocket specifically for that reason. Okay, approach checklist. Seatbelt light on. Landing lights on. Fuel tank selectors both on. Prop RPM to max, gently. Flaps to approach position. And brakes confirmed off. Let's not drop down quite that far, actually. Like some of those hills. We will make our approach starting at 2400, I think. And this is why we look outside while we're working on these things. Attention passengers, we're now approaching Townsville and I've switched on the seatbelt lights, which means I'd like you to fasten your seatbelts. Enjoy this riddle and more as we come in towards landing, and thank you again for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Okay, and now we start across to lovely place to put an island. And yes, we do have the goodest co-pilot with us as always. I think he's been having a fairly good flight. He's not had to yell at me or bite me for missing too many things on the controls, which is always nice. Once we get the flaps down, it starts to get a little bit interesting on what speed the plane wants to fly. At least partially because you will have missed this, but I did this as a fully loaded flight, just out of curiosity. So, assuming that after 2 weeks on Hamilton Island and going around the Whitsundays, people have picked up souvenirs, maybe even scuba gear or something, and yeah, so the entire cargo pod is full, which is making the plane that little bit heavier just to make it spicy. Turning onto final approach. Seatbelt lights are on. Cleared to land, runway 19, Martel 22. And hopefully we've just captured the glide slope. So, flaps to landing position. Ooh. Not quite that quick a descent, please. That's better. 6-knot winds basically down the runway, so that's all okay. Yep, there we are on the glide slope, on the GPS localizer. Yes, it is quite lovely and blue. This is one of the things as you get into the tropical parts of Australia where just the weather is just that much nicer when it's not boiling you alive. So, glide slope, that is the 3-degree path down towards the runway that you are ideally meant to fly along to get a nice smooth landing. So, yes, 3-degree descent is the standard for most runways. There are some where it is steeper because of terrain, some where it's shallower because of weird reasons. Okay, autopilot off, watching the airspeed, watching the runway, little bit bumpy. Flappy lights are showing us a little bit high. gentle braking. It is apparently 27 where we've just landed, so, you know, that's a little bit nicer. And I will point out that that is the winter temperature. And looks like the taxi guides are having us go off to the right. And as this is an international airport, we will be clearing the runway nice and briskly. Parking brake on. Contacting ground on 121.8, Martel 22. Goodbye. Okay, before arrival taxi checklist. Taxi lights on, landing lights off, strobe lights off, seatbelt light on, taxi clearance. Townsville ground, Martel 22, request taxi to parking. Taxiing to general aviation parking using taxiway Delta 2, Delta 1, Martel 22. Taxi clearance check. Inertial separator bypass. Prop RPM minimum. Fuel condition low idle. And a parking brake handle off. Before arrival taxi checklist complete. Attention passengers, we've landed safely in Townsville and the local time is 12:42 PM. Please remain seated until the plane comes to a complete stop at whatever ridiculous parking spot they give us, because queuing for the exit in an 8-seater makes you look even more ridiculous than normal. Okay, let's get to taxiing. So yes, in Townsville, apparently 27 is reasonable winter weather. Which is a little bit ridiculous. Holding position Martel 22. This guy wants to get crunched in his little white van. Continuing taxi, Martel 22. I am now curious as to whether aircraft taxiing and taxi cabs taxiing are related. I think, once I'm not driving, I'll be looking that up. And what the heck is this guy doing? There's our parking spot with pigeons and a marshaller. And there we go. Parked. Okay, a shutdown checklist. Parking brake set, power lever idle, bleed air heat switch off, ITT range is stable, prop RPM to feather, fuel condition cut. The wind down. Inertial separator to normal. And external lights off. Seatbelt light off. Attention passengers, this now concludes our flight from Hamilton Island to Townsville, and we here at Martel Air hope you've enjoyed your time in our tiny sky bus. Please wait until I've opened the door and you can calmly deplane in an orderly fashion. Our baggage handling services today will be provided by our wonderful passengers, so thank you for not leaving any of your luggage behind. Any personal belongings left behind as you leave the plane will be assumed to be a present to the co-pilot and enjoyed thoroughly. And on your way out, don't forget that we have a Ko-fi machine in the back of the plane if you wish to support Wing Commander Lamington's dog treats habit. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Huh. There you go. I've now learned a thing about taxiing. And as mentioned during the Fokker triplane episode, the early flight manuals spelled it T-A-X-Y-I-N-G. I mean, the text isn't too small on my screen, and depends on how it goes for people reading it down the side of the screen, but there we go. Some aviators and some linguists report that around the year 1911, the slang word taxi was in use for an airplane. They suggest that the way aircraft move under power before they take off or after they land reminded someone of the way taxicabs slowly drove around the block when looking for passengers. And yeah, with planes of that vintage, they had almost no ground handling ability, so that would be quite the experience. As mentioned in the Fokker triplane episode, the way you maneuvered was generally by having a couple of guys lift up the back of the plane and steer it. Your ground brakes was a couple of guys holding the wings and trying to stop it going forwards. Okay, rest of the shutdown checklist. Internal lighting. Off. Fuel boost switch off. NG is at 0. Check. Avionics 2 off. Avionics 1 off. And the plane gets quieter as the various electronics cooling fans shut down. And battery off with the last of the system fans. And fuel tank selectors both off. Shutdown checklist complete. Ooh, that's a weird view. So yes, that concludes our flight up to Townsville. Just getting a nice angle here to look at the plane from. Let's look at it over these pigeons. There we go. Pigeon, pigeon, pigeon. So, hopefully you've enjoyed this flight with some ramblings about place names. If there's anything you'd like me to prepare a ramble about for next week, feel free to let me know. And, so Piney Tree in particular, if you have comments on how the checklist special went, I would be fascinated to hear them, because want to make the stream content as good as possible. So, hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully you enjoy that, and I will see you next week for our flight up to probably Cairns. So, thank you very much.